Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Week 18 wildcard round 3-game slate for Sunday over on Draftkings. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me around 50% of the people watch these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you just new like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow. That's obviously going to help me out as well. And if you don't follow me over on social media, the handle is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that if you want access to all the sheets that I post for all the sports that I cover each and every single day or each and every single week, depending on the sport. But I think that's it for the plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. Now keep in mind, I'm only going to have a few players listed at each position here because I want to go over every single player on the slate. That'll take forever, and I'll have interest in everybody, so I don't really think we should waste time talking about them. Not saying you can't play them, but as of right now, I think today's Wednesday afternoon. These are the guys that I do have interest in. Now, keep in mind, things can change throughout the weekend because it is only Wednesday, so if guys get hit with COVID, we have some injury news, or guys pop up on the injury report throughout the week, yeah, some of my stances on things will change, so keep that in mind. But as of right now, this is what we're rolling with. But up top, we have Lamar Jackson, just shy of $8,000, and he's definitely going to be the one to be the guy you're going to want to build around on this slate. I know he's expensive, but this is a good matchup versus Tennessee. This is going to be a great game for fantasy purposes. We have a 55-point over-under, which is the highest on this slate, so it's the highest of the entire weekend as well, just beating out that Buffalo and Indy game. The Ravens have the highest implied team total on the slate and the weekend at 29.25. You have a nice tight 3.5-point spread. So I'm expecting a very good game here. Both teams definitely have some firepower, and I am looking forward to it. Get a nice rematch from last year when the Titans upset the Ravens. I believe that was the divisional round. You know, the Ravens had the first round bye. Lamar Jackson coming off that insane regular season performance that he had. Not just one performance, but through the entire season. So yeah, that was a good game, and I'm looking forward to, I guess, a revenge spot here for the Ravens. But I'm liking Lamar Jackson quite a bit. This Titans defense is not good. We saw that last weekend when they faced the Houston Texans. I mean, the Texans really had no business being in that game, and they almost won that game. But Ryan Tannehill threw that absolute bomb to A.J. Brown like a few seconds left in the fourth quarter. They hit the field goal. I think that doink off the uprights, ended up making it in, though. That was a really fun game for fantasy purposes and just a fan's perspective if you're watching that game. But yeah, this defense is not very good. Brandon Cooks had over 40 points. Deshaun Watson had around 30, well over 300 passing yards. So I think Lamar Jackson can get the job done here. Not saying he's going to get 300 plus passing yards, but the thing that Lamar Jackson does that most quarterbacks don't, he can get you around 100 rushing yards any single time he's on the field. And this team that loves to run the football, and the Titans defense, they're not that great versus the run or versus the pass. So either way you slice it up, it's a good matchup here for Lamar Jackson. And they have the highest implied team total in the slate, so I'm expecting a lot of points to be scored from the Ravens. Now, his passing numbers this season have been quite pedestrian, only throwing the ball 25 times per game, less than 2 passing touchdowns, and well below 200 passing yards. But what's really nice is we're this nice shade of green here. We have about 70 rushing yards per game from him, close to double-digit rushing attempts, although in the second half of the season, it's been kind of like double-digit rushing attempts per game, and close to half a rushing touchdown, also 6.3 yards per carry. But the matchup through the air versus the Tennessee Titans is pretty darn good. They are allowing the 5th most points per game to the quarterback position, close to 300 passing yards, and also 30th DVA versus the pass. They're not that good versus the run. I can show you that when we go to the running back page, when we talk about J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, two guys I think are quite interesting. But actually, we can show you that now since we're talking about Lamar Jackson. Because when you're looking at a defense, when Lamar's facing them, it's a good idea to look at the run defense because that's what Lamar Jackson's going to be doing quite a bit. So if we go to Dobbins here, obviously he's got the same matchup that Lamar would have. The Titans are 16th DVA versus the run, which is more so mid-pack, but they're 26th versus running backs, and they're allowing over 26 Draftkings points per game, about 100 rushing yards, and close to a rushing touchdown. So I think it's a very good spot for Lamar Jackson. Would not be surprised if he gets you around 30 Draftkings points, which I don't really think any other quarterback on this slate has the upside that Lamar does. So I know he's expensive, but I feel like he's definitely going to be one of those guys we're going to want to build around on this one. Then dropping down to the other side of this game, we have Ryan Tannehill at $6,600. Now I'm viewing him as a tournament option only just because this is a team that loves to run the football. And the thing is, the Titans' key to success here is going to just be pounding the rock with Derrick Henry. We saw that in the last playoff game that they had versus the Baltimore Ravens, where Derrick Henry just got ran into the ground. He had close to 30 touches in that game, close to 200 rushing yards, and they were underdogs, and they're underdogs in this one. But the way to beat the Ravens is just to keep the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands, because that Titans defense, you can't trust it. And if the Ravens get the ball a ton, they're probably going to be putting up points almost every single drive. So the key to success here for the Tennessee Titans is just to run the ball with Derrick Henry as much as possible, kill that clock, and don't give Lamar Jackson many opportunities, because he can certainly put up a lot of points here. So I'm assuming that's going to be the Titans' game plan. Now, Ryan Tannehill is still a fine option. He's got good weapons to get the ball to, and Corey Davis and A.J. Brown. So I'm viewing him as a tournament option here, but I don't think I'd really go there in cash games, just because I could see this being a game they're going to rely on Derrick Henry like they do pretty much every single week. Throwing the ball 30 times per game, 8 yards per attempt, which is actually pretty good. Ryan Tannehill is not a bad quarterback by any means. It's just he doesn't have the upside that Lamar Jackson does. Not saying they're priced similarly, but I mean, I think Tannehill, on a good day in this game, he's probably going to get around 20-ish points. Meanwhile, Lamar Jackson, I think the floor is at least 20 points with that rushing ability. So, tournament option only for me, and the matchup's not that great either. The Ravens are allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the quarterback position. They're 10th versus the run. Ryan Tannehill does have a bit of a rushing upside. I mean, he gets the occasional rushing touchdown, but as you can see, he's actually close to Lamar Jackson, about nearly half a rushing touchdown per game. So it boosts his floor a little bit, but I'm probably not going to go there in cash games. But Big Ben at $6,100. So like as of right now, between these 4 quarterbacks, I think my 2 favorite options are Lamar Jackson and Big Ben, because this Cleveland team got hit with COVID at the worst time. And as you can see on the hoodie that I'm wearing, I'm a big Browns fan. And it's very unfortunate that I've been waiting my entire life to see the Browns make the playoffs, and we just got decimated by COVID. There's no head coach. Half the team seems to be out. So, yeah, it sucks. So I'm not expecting the Browns to come out here and put up too much of a fight. I don't think it's going to be an absolute blowout, but their defense is already bad. And if they're going to be without Denzel Ward in this game, I think that's still up in the air. I've not seen any confirmation if Denzel Ward's going to be in or out, but it really hasn't seemed to matter this season, because when he's in, they'll just go to the guy that's not being guarded by Denzel Ward. And if he's out, good luck. There's really no one that can cover any of these wide receivers, and Juju, Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool, if I didn't already mention him. So I'm thinking Big Ben should have a pretty solid game. He's also playing at home, and he's cheap, and this is a team that loves us for the football. He's throwing the ball over 40 times per game this season. The run game just has not been that great. James Conner looks like he's running in mud, it seems like at times. So yeah, I think Big Ben is actually a pretty solid option. Cleveland's 25th versus quarterbacks. They're 25th DVOA versus the pass. They're allowing close to 22 DraftKings points per game. So if you can't get up to Lamar in this slate, I actually think Big Ben is a pretty solid option, because the Browns have been decent versus running backs this season, and the way to beat them has been through the air, and that's what the Pittsburgh Steelers are built to do, is just pretty much throw the ball all game. So it sets up well for a big, I was going to say a big Ben game, but I think he's a fine option. Then Drew Brees at $5,700. If you need a value quarterback, I know he's not that much cheaper than Big Ben, but if you can't get up to Big Ben for some reason, I think Drew Brees is fine as long as he has Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas on the field. Both those guys are questionable. We know Alvin Kamara got hit with COVID last week, although he is eligible to return, I believe, on Saturday, something like that. So, and this game is on Sunday, so if he is cleared to go, I think that's a boost for Drew Brees, because he's going to dump the ball off to him a lot. And if Michael Thomas is back, I mean, that's an obvious boost for Drew Brees, getting his wide receiver one of the better wide receivers in football, back. He is currently listed as questionable, but he is fully expected to make his return this week. And they have a team total close to 29 here, so points are going to be scored. I know the Bears defense is pretty solid, but the Saints offense, if they get their big 3 back, Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, that would definitely be a big boost for the offense. They still put up like 30-plus points last week versus the Panthers without Michael Thomas or Alvin Kamara. So I think they'll definitely be able to put up points here. And I know the Bears defense pretty tough on quarterbacks, allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the position, tied there with the Baltimore Ravens. They're also 13th DVOA versus the pass, but $5,700, if he can get you like 200, 250 passing yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns, not the worst play in the world, although I know it doesn't feel great playing just dusty Drew Brees for sure. With that being said, we move on to the running back position. All right, up top, we have the monster himself, Derrick Henry, at $9,200. And I actually think he's a pretty interesting option here, because people are going to take a stance. Are they going to fade Henry, or are they going to play Henry? And the only problem with playing Derrick Henry is he just does not catch passes. So if the Titans do fall behind in this game, there's definitely ways to fade Henry here. And we can look back at the matchup versus Cleveland that was back in week 13, where the Titans fell behind 20-some points in the first half, or maybe even close to 30 points. They were getting absolutely blown out. Derrick Henry in that game had 6.9 fantasy points, only had 15 carries and 60 yards to not get into the end zone. He wasn't involved in the passing game either. So if you think the Ravens come out here and just put it on the Titans early on, there's ways to fade Derrick Henry here. But if you think this is going to be a close game, or we see something similar like we saw in the last playoff matchup these guys had, where the Titans upset the Ravens and they just pound the rock with Derrick Henry. What I was saying with Ryan Tannehill, I think the key to success here for the Tennessee Titans is to run the ball down the Baltimore Ravens' throats and don't give Lamar Jackson opportunities to score on that bad defense, because it will certainly allow a lot of points, because you know the defense is not very good. So I think you have to take a stance here of what you think the game is going to be. If you think the Ravens are going to be winning this game by quite a bit and they're not going to be able to just run the ball with Derrick Henry, you can fade him. If you think this game is going to be close, you could like split your exposure on Derrick Henry. I'm kind of iffy on that right now, because if Alvin Kamara is cleared, I think he has a higher floor because he's going to catch a lot of passes, something that Derrick Henry is not going to do. Or if you think the Titans just take over this game and win it, I think Derrick Henry would obviously be a very good play in that scenario. But there's definitely ways you can go. It just depends on how you see this game going. Now, personally, I don't think it's going to be like lopsided either way. I think it's going to be a very close back and forth game. So I'm very iffy on Derrick Henry right now. Like if Alvin Kamara is cleared, he's $700 cheaper. I feel like the floor is a bit higher, so I might just gravitate more towards him because I don't think I'm going to be able to afford both. If I could, that'd be great. If not, I don't think it's an absolute necessity to play Derrick Henry. Just know he's always going to be high owned because it's Derrick Henry. We're the playoffs. He's coming off a monster game where he had nearly 40 Draftkings points, 250 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. So I think it's a good option, but again, I don't think it's an absolute must because of the price point, especially if they happen to fall behind in this game. And they are 3.5-point dogs. Not saying that's something huge, like 10-point dogs like David Montgomery is. It's just he doesn't catch passes, so that's the concern. Only 1.5 targets per game this season, less than a 7% target share. You're going to get you like 25 to 30 carries on the ground and should get you over 100 rushing yards. It's just we're going to need him to get into the end zone, which is something he usually does. Over a rushing touchdown per game this season, nearly 5.5 yards per carry. Now, the matchup versus the Ravens, they're a bit easier to run on than they are to pass on. They're kind of mid-pack versus running backs this season, 12th DV versus the run, and 13th versus running backs. Not really allowing rushing touchdowns, though. Less than a half a rushing touchdown per game and less than 100 rushing yards. They are kind of getting beat up through the air, though. Not saying it's anything horrible, but over 5 catches per game, 0.31 receiving touchdowns per game, and close to 40 receiving yards. So it's just how you think the game's going to go. Personally, I think it's going to be close, and I don't think he's a must-play, but obviously it's Derrick Henry, so I'm not opposed to playing him. And then Alvin Kamara, $8,500. So if he's cleared and good to go, I could see him being the one you're going to want to play over Derrick Henry just because he's $700 cheaper. And it's Alvin Kamara. He's got massive upside. The Saints have a higher implied team total. They're 10-point favorites at home here. And unlike Derrick Henry, he catches a lot of passes. On the season, close to a 23% target share, about 7 targets per game, 50 receiving yards, close to 6 catches. And you got to keep in mind, some of these numbers are with Taysom Hill, and Taysom Hill just did not throw the ball to Alvin Kamara besides that one game before Drew Brees came back. He had 10 targets, but besides that, I mean, he was just kind of like an afterthought in the passing game. So if you take that out of the equation, we're looking at closer to a 25% target share, over 7 targets per game, and some much better numbers. So if Kamara's cleared, I really like him a lot here. I know the matchup versus the Bears is not that great. They're 4th DV versus the run, and they're 9th versus running backs. But I'm mostly just concerned with what he does through the air. He's also a magnet to scoring touchdowns. Like in the last game he played, which was on Christmas, he had 6 rushing touchdowns. So the guy can get it done either way. And I like Alvin Kamara quite a bit. I think he's a very safe option. And I think you can make the case for him being the safer option over Derrick Henry because of that PPR upside that he offers you. And then after that, we get a bit of a tier drop off. So we get David Montgomery here just below $7,000. And the good matchups finally end for him. He had 6 straight games, over 20 fantasy points, and he had 7 good matchups in a row. Like, let me just list these matchups for you. So Green Bay, Jacksonville, Minnesota, Houston, Detroit, Green Bay again, Tennessee, and then all the way back in week 8, he faced New Orleans Saints, which is who he's facing again. But those are pretty much the best matchups you could ask for. It was just insane how lucky his matchup draw was. But he stepped up in those games. Like, he was really, really good. He was getting all the volume. He was involved in the passing game. And that should be the case once again. Now, I don't think the Bears can be able to establish the run here versus the Saints. That's definitely an issue. They are 10-point dogs here on the road, and the Saints' run defense has been good for quite some time now this season. They're 2nd DV versus the run. They're allowing the fewest points per game to the running back position, less than 80 rushing yards per game, not really giving up much through the air as well. So why do I have David Montgomery here? Well, it's a small slate, and he gets plenty of volume, so it does make him interesting. He's also coming off a game where he had 9 targets in that game, so even if they do fall behind, which I'm assuming that's going to be the case, he should still catch enough dump-offs to at least make him viable, especially if he happens to get into the end zone. Plus, the Bears' offense has been putting up a lot of points recently. I know they didn't go absolutely off versus the Green Bay Packers, but this has been at least a competent offense under Mitch Trubisky the past month now. So I think Montgomery is a fine tournament option. Not sure if I'm going to get there in cash games, although this is a small slate. So if you're going to be a running back that has the potential to give me 20-plus touches below $7,000, even though it's a bad matchup, I still think it's an interesting option. Then J.K. Dobbins here at 6,600 bucks. So I wish he was a bit cheaper, but he's been scoring touchdowns every single week. Like, he's had a touchdown every single game since week 11 versus Tennessee. Now, the only problem is he doesn't get a ton of volume because this is a bit of a busy backfield. Now, it's kind of centered around Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins now, so Mark Ingram's out of the picture, so it makes things a bit easier. But you keep in mind, Lamar Jackson's going to steal some carries too, so it's kind of hard to trust the volume here, so I think he's a better tournament play rather than anything else. Plus, I feel like he might be a bit too expensive because Gus Edwards getting similar volume, he's about $2,000 cheaper, so I wish he was a bit cheaper, but I think he's fine in tournaments. This is a good matchup versus Tennessee. They just do not have a good defense this year, whether it's through the air or versus the run. They're 16th versus running backs, but they're 26 in fantasy points allowed per game. I kind of went over this when I talked about Lamar Jackson, so I'm not going to say it again, but I think Dobbins is a fine tournament play. He's just not that involved in the passing game either, about 1.5 targets per game and a 6.4% target share. Very efficient with his touches, though. He's only getting less than 10 carries a game, although that's kind of games early in the season where he wasn't as involved. That's certainly gone up as we get later into the season, but 6 yards per carry. Pretty darn good. I know he's not getting the ball like Derrick Henry, where he's getting like 30 carries a game, so it's not as impressive, but he has been very efficient with his touches. So I think Dobbins is fine. Plus, they have the 29.25 implied team total, and they're 3.5-point favorites. So I would not be surprised if that touchdown streak continues once again. And then if you're looking back at Week 11 versus Tennessee, you had 15 carries, 70 yards, got into the end zone, good for close to 20 DraftKings points. Then James Conner and Kareem Hunt. So I think they both make interesting tournament plays, but I'm not that comfortable playing either. We'll start with James Conner. He's cheap enough on a team that should be winning, and they should have scoring opportunities here. They have a team total of 26.5. They're 6-point favorites at home. I know the volume hasn't exactly been there for James Conner over the past month or so now, but assuming he can get us close to 15 touches, maybe somehow he gets close to 20 and mix in a couple of targets in there as well, I think he can pay off his price point of $5,000, but he certainly hasn't been the greatest running back in the world this season. There is no denying that, but this Cleveland team, they got hit with COVID, and I imagine the Steelers are going to be playing with a lead here. They're 19th versus the run, although when it comes to fantasy points per game given up to the position, they've actually been a bit tough versus running backs, allowing the 8th fewest points per game, less than 85 rushing yards, not even a rushing touchdown. Also haven't been getting that beat up through the air as well. So Connor, not really the most comfortable play in the world, but I do think he's fine for tournaments just from a game flow perspective, assuming the Steelers are winning this game. And then Kareem Hunt on the flip side of that, he is more the pass catching back in this offense, and if you think the Browns are going to be trailing this game, I think he makes sense, assuming he gets some dump offs, gets you around 10 to 15 total touches, mix in some targets in there, and I think he's a fine option there. Now the per game stats for Kareem Hunt, they're a bit skewed because he did have that stretch where he was the starting running back with Nick Chubb out. Now that Nick Chubb's back, it's pretty much an even split there, but Kareem Hunt is the more involved back in the passing game, but this is a tough matchup versus the Steelers. They're tough on running backs, they're tough on wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, you name it. The running backs this season are on the 2nd fewest points per game. They're 50 versus the run, and just really not giving up that much numbers through the air to running backs as well. So the matchup sucks, but Kareem Hunt is a talented back, and if they are trailing, he should get a couple of dump offs, and he could pay off that price point if he gets into the end zone. Then Gus Edwards, I would say, I think you can make a case for playing Gus Edwards over J.K. Dobbins now. I'm more confident in Dobbins over Edwards. Yes, but they are getting similar touches, and we've seen him get some usage around the goal line. So at $4,400, I don't hate that as like a flex spot. Don't think I'd make him my RB2, but point per dollar wise, $4,400, if he can get us like 10 to 12 carries and maybe get into the end zone, I think you can pay off that price point at only $4,400. With that being said, I think we move on to the wide receiver position. Now, there's a couple of studs that I left off here, including A.J. Brown. Again, these guys are not bad plays, but assuming I'm spending up for running backs, it's not going to be that easy to spend up for another wide receiver, assuming I also spend up for Lamar Jackson. So if you're following like kind of the roster construction here, again, you can change your lineup however you want. But personally, Michael Thomas is $6,300. He's my favorite spend up as of right now, assuming he is good to go. But this is just way too cheap for Michael Thomas, assuming he is back and in a full-time, 100% good-to-go role. And have a team total close to 29 here. He's the obvious target for Drew Brees. I know Drew Brees hasn't been the best by any means this season, but in the games that Michael Thomas has played this year, we're talking close to 8 targets per game, close to a 30% target share, nearly a 45% market share of the team's air yards. Yeah, he's going to be a pretty good play here despite the bad matchup here versus the Chicago Bears. They're allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the position, and they're also 13th DVA versus the pass, but the team total close to 30, and we know how good Michael Thomas can be when he's on the field. Yeah, he's going to be a very good play. And if Alvin Kamara happens to not get cleared, Michael Thomas is good to go. I mean, $6,300 is just an absolute steal for a guy that should see 10 plus targets in this game. And then after Thomas, I'm just going to group these guys together. So we have the trio of Steelers wide receivers and Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Chase Claypool. So obviously, I'd prefer Deontay Johnson over all of these guys if I had to pick one, but he's priced like that at $6,200. But if we compare their numbers this season, so just scroll over here. So Deontay Johnson sitting there on a 23% target share, Juju Smith-Schuster close to a 20% target share, and Chase Claypool a little bit over a 15% target share. Now keep in mind, a lot of the games this season, Deontay Johnson has got injured, so they counted those games, and then he got into the game, left the game early, never came back. So it's going to count those games, but if you take those out of the equation, we're talking closer to a 25-30% target share, close to 10 targets per game. And again, if you take those games out of the equation, we're probably talking over 10 targets per game. So he's definitely the guy I prefer here, and both, or not both, all these wide receivers should have a very strong game versus this Browns secondary, which just really hasn't been able to stop anyone at all this season. They're ranked 24th versus wide receivers, or 25th versus the pass, and allowing over 40 DraftKings points per game to the position. If Denzel Ward happens to get ruled out, it should be very easy pickings for all three of these wide receivers. They're all very talented. They can definitely take advantage of the soft matchups that they should have. So all these guys are playable. Just depends on how much money you have left in your lineup. I would not be opposed to even playing all three in certain lineups. If you're playing tournaments, use Big Ben, use all three wide receivers, run it back with the Browns wide receiver. I mean, I don't hate that idea whatsoever. Might not be the best way to go in cash games, but if I had to rank them, it would be Deontay Johnson, Juju, and Chase Claypool, but that's exactly how they're priced. So again, just comes down to your roster construction and what you have money left to pay for. Then Hollywood Brown here at $5,400. He has turned it up the past month now. He was really struggling for quite some time, but in recent weeks, he's definitely gotten a little bit better. And this is a very good matchup versus that Titans secondary. We saw what Brandon Cooks did to them last weekend. So on the season, they are 31st versus wide receivers, meaning they're allowing the second most points per game to the position. They're 30th DVA versus the pass, and allowing close to 46 DraftKings points per game. Now, I'm not saying Marquise Brown's going to get like 50 DraftKings points here, but I would not be surprised if he broke 100 yards now. That might be a bit bold because Lamar Jackson struggles to get over 100 passing yards a lot of weeks, but I do like Hollywood Brown here quite a bit as a nice deep play threat. He's got a 25% target share, close to a 40% market share of the team's air yards. He's definitely not the most consistent wide receiver, but this is definitely a good matchup for him to be able to hit a big one. Plus, we have a team total close to 30 here, so a lot of points should be scored in this offense. Then Corey Davis at $4,800. I do prefer him over AJ Brown when it comes to the price tag. I think AJ Brown's obviously a much better play, but when it comes down to the price point, you get Corey Davis for over $2,000 cheaper. Plus, he's been getting plenty of targets this season now. He's obviously the wide receiver 2 here, but close to 6.5 targets per game, 70 receiving yards, close to a 25% target share. Those numbers are not that bad for a guy that's below $5,000. Keep in mind, he was a former first-round pick, so the guy's very talented. Now, the matchup as a wide receiver versus the Ravens, it's definitely not my favorite. They're allowing the 10th fewest points per game to the position, 10th DVA versus the pass, and less than 150 receiving yards per game. And this is a team that doesn't like to throw the football too much, and I assume they're going to rely on Derrick Henry here, so again, it's mainly just a price thing here, and if you think the Ravens do get to a lead, it would make sense that the Titans would be throwing the ball more. So Corey Davis at $4,800, I do think he's a pretty solid play given his price point. Then Darnell Mooney at $3,900. Now, he's currently questionable. It's a new injury, so we'll see if he's going to be good to go. But if he's good to go, I'm assuming the Saints are going to try to scheme out Allen Robinson as best as they can. So Mooney's actually coming off a game where he had a ton of targets in that one. He actually had 13 in that one for a season high. Also caught 11, which is also a season high. Still only had 20 DraftKings points, but the guy has been involved all season. It's not like he's just now getting involved. He's had targets every single week on the season. A little bit less than 6 targets per game, over a 15% target share, 22% market share of the team's air yards. And I assume the Bears are going to be trailing in this game. They are 10-point dogs on the road. And assuming the Saints try to scheme out Allen Robinson, I think Mooney could get at least some softer coverage here and maybe get some garbage time work. But this is a tougher matchup versus the Saints. They're kind of mid-pack versus wide receivers, but they're still a third DVA versus the pass. But this is mainly just a price play here to open up our lineup. Then moving on to the tight ends, not really a fun position here, but Mark Andrews is the clear tight end 1. Slate, he's $5,200, but he's one of the top options for Lamar Jackson, or really the top option here, close to 6.5 targets per game, a 25% target share, also a 30% market share of the team's air yards, so he gets targeted down the field as well. He's got half a receiving touchdown per game and over 4 catches, so yeah, he's a solid option here. Now the Titans versus tight ends this season, kind of mid-pack, 18th versus the position, but they're 30th DVA versus the pass, and I would not be surprised if Mark Andrews happens to find the end zone in this one. Then if you need some cheap tight ends, I really don't feel like these guys are much different than the other. Austin Hooper, the tight end 1 on this team. He had a lot of targets a couple weeks ago versus the Jets because he was the only really main pass catching option that the Browns had. Obviously, those targets came down last week, but he still got into the end zone. There was also another play where he was wide open in the end zone. Baker didn't even look his way, so he could have had 2 touchdowns, but he's always a threat of scoring. He's below $4,000, so I think he's a fine option. On the season, about 5 targets per game, close to a 20% target share. Now, the Steelers, though, they're pretty tough on tight ends. In addition to being first versus the pass, they're allowing the second fewest points per game to the position. So, not expecting a lot here from Hooper, but he always has a nice chance of scoring. Eric Ebron, he's currently on the COVID list. Not sure if he's going to be able to get activated or not. There really isn't that much news on the guys if they can get activated. But if he is cleared, this is a very good matchup as a tight end versus the Browns. They struggled versus them all season long, allowing the 4th most points per game to position. They're 25th versus the pass. So if Ebron can get a handful of targets here, I don't mind that at all. Then Jonnu Smith at $3,200. It's going to be a high scoring game. He should get a handful of targets. If he gets to the end zone, he'll pay off his price point. If he doesn't, even then a couple of catches and like 20 to 50 yards would be fine at that price point. The Ravens are kind of just mid-pack versus tight ends. It's mainly just whoever you have money for the tight end position, I guess you can play them, or if it makes more sense in your lineup to have another Titan, go for it. But I really don't think there's much difference here between Hooper, Ebron, or Jonnu Smith. And as for the defenses, nothing really too exciting here. The Saints are obviously the top option here. They're 10-point favorites at home. They have a team total of only 18.75 against them, so you have the money for them. Great. But if you need to save a couple more bucks here, the Steelers defense going up against the Cleveland Browns here, we're missing some key pieces like Joel Bitonio, one of the best offensive guards in football. He's going to miss this game. Also have some injuries for their backup, so might be able to get some pressure on Baker. Plus, he seems without one of his wide receivers in Kadero Hodge, which I know is not a big game, but he is at least a decent piece to that offense. So, Steelers defense, one of the best defenses in football. They're playing at home. Team total of 20.5 against them, and they're 6-point favorites. Yeah, it makes sense. But if you need a cheap defense, I don't hate the Cleveland Browns at $2,500 just because Big Ben has obviously not been the same guy as he's been his whole entire career this season. Definitely has shown some weaknesses, and I'm just going off the fact here that the Browns made their first playoff appearance since 2002. They're going to be hyped up for this game. I know they're missing some starters. If they're without Denzel Ward, it's definitely going to be a very tough time for them, but maybe they're just coming out super motivated. I might just be talking as a big Browns fan here, as I do have the hoodie on, so you could just disregard everything I say here, but they are cheap, and Big Ben, he has made some mistakes this year, so it might not be the worst play in the entire world if you need a cheap defense. But with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for this video, so I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. You're going to follow me over on social media. I'm at Pennell16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. You get access to all the sheets for all the sports that I cover, and you can have them to the Discord chats as well. But I think that's about it, so I'll stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video.